Hey everybody, my name is Jacob Snow, and I'm here today to talk to you about two books I found using the Oxford Scholarship Library made available to us lucky students of Liberty University. The first is called West Pointers and the Civil War. It is by Wayne Weixiang Xie. I know I butchered that pronunciation and I apologize, but Chinese is hard for me to make my mouth move around. His book focuses on several factors of the Civil War that are often ignored. Military factors, the shared background of many of the commanders on both sides of the wars. Um, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Ulysses Grant. These were three of the biggest names of the William Tecumseh Sherman is another one. These were three of the biggest names in the Civil War, and they were all West Point men. They had been educated at the same institution. It's akin to if a war broke out there and Liberty students were on opposite sides of the field. It would be very awkward, very peculiar feeling to know that beliefs had gone so differently. Hmm. But Wayne Sia, his book emphasizes firstly the military backgrounds of these men. These were not novices, unlike most of the other forces at play in the Civil War. Most of the soldiers, the foot soldiers of the Civil War, were horribly inexperienced. They had no idea how to use their weapons, mixed unit tactics, mobilization on the battlefield, what certain orders meant. Statistics of the time state that in an early training exercise, a Union commander told of his men, 900 men, to fire at the broadside of a barn, and not one of them hit it. They were actually that inaccurate with their weapons, despite the fact, as Seh points out, they were using the most accurate modern weapon available to armies at that time. The rifle musket is the first gun to really use in barrel rifling to give bullets spin and make it much more accurate in the long run. Was it still excessively accurate, like modern sniper rifles or like the guns in many first person shooter video games? No, it wasn't that accurate, but it was much more accurate than the smoothbore muskets had been in the past. But the fact of the matter is that firing at broadside of a barn, no one hit. Many of the soldiers even elevated their guns as though they were firing a bow to ensure the hit, and the distance was not that grand either. So equipment is good, but as any military historian knows, the equipment is only as good as the man behind it. And if you don't know what you're doing, your chances of failure are much higher, even if you are wielding superior equipment. Seh's book is exceptional. It emphasizes the different elements, the military experiences. For instance, Robert E. Lee and Ulysses Grant both were Mexican American War veterans and both had fought in battles, with Lee doing valiantly on the field of battle and Grant utilizing excessively unconventional tactics to win the day in many ways. This shared background, again, it makes me think. It makes me ponder. It makes me wonder what it was like for these guys going into battle knowing that they had all learned the same things. They had all studied the same courses. They had been instructed at West Point in military movements and things the same exact way. And we're now having to utilize that information against students who shared an alma mater with them. It gives Superman pause. The second book that I pulled up is Why Confederates Fought. This is another area that is often criminally overlooked in Civil War studies. It is painfully overlooked. This book is by Aaron Sheehan Dean. And he does a really good job of representing that, yes, while slaveholders were an interest at play, that was an aspect of the war. That was not the only reason the Confederacy had for fighting. For many of the combatants, Dean points out that they were just fighting for state loyalty. They were fighting because essentially they were told to. They were given the order. Um, the management, to utilize modern day terminology, the 2%, if you will, of people that actually owned slaves were the ones who had that kind of motivation going in. But for the common soldiers, it was more a hostile force is telling us we can't leave. A hostile force is marching into our territory and shooting and attacking. As we saw in the Battle of Bull Run, we're fighting each other, and I'm not just going to let my state fall prey to a foreign entity. I don't care if it's just a couple of miles away from me or not. This is just one of the many myriad reasons present. Confederates fought in the war. And again, I'm not saying that slavery was not a reason for some people, but I'm saying that many textbooks, the entire time I was growing up, even some textbooks in my collegiate career, like Keene's Visions of America, Keene and her associates who wrote the Visions of America textbooks, volumes 1 and 2, when they focused on the Civil War, they essentially painted it as a war fought exclusively over the issue of slavery, with the entire Confederacy being pro-slavery and the entire Union being anti-slavery and for the rights of the blacks. Oversimplifications like that make for bad history, make for biased, unbalanced history, and we as historians need to avoid that. We need to understand that it's easy to take an issue that is present, an issue, a single facet, and just take it, put it on your paintbrush, and apply the coat of paint to the entire scenario, when in reality it's much more complicated and nuanced than that. There were people who were benefiting, as Dean points out, from a slave economy, if you will. But for some people, like Robert Hooke from Virginia, he's in the 1st Virginia Cavalry. He wrote in a letter, April 20th of 1861. He says, "It goes right hard for me to leave, but I intend to hold to my company and defend my country, and our consolation is if I have to be killed, it will be in defending my country." For many of these people, they had patriotism and they felt betrayed by the government. They felt attacked by the Union government. And so instead of just crumbling and saying it's all meaningless, they decided to hold to what they had. They held to their state governments. They held to the government of the Confederacy, and they fought for that reason. Not because they were benefiting from slavery, but because they felt attacked. They felt their rights were being taken away. Very sobering, very chilling thought, honestly. Often I've pondered personally if the reason so often the Union and the Confederacy are made to look like it was over an issue just like slavery is because it does allow you to take and make the Civil War a black and white conflict when it wasn't. The Civil War is a very disgustingly gray mess, with soldiers on both sides wanting freedom for the blacks and soldiers on both sides wanting the blacks sent back to Africa, and soldiers on both sides wishing they just didn't exist to begin with. The Civil War doesn't let you go and say this side is purely good and this side is purely evil. For many of the Confederates, the war was about the rights of the states in the face of the government, and for many of the Union, the war was about the right of the government to suppress the states should they get belligerent. For some of the soldiers of the Union, it was about the freedom of the blacks, and for some of the soldiers in the South, it was about the freedom of the blacks as well. but you can't just say that this is the reason for this war. And Dean admits that. Dean doesn't jump down the same trope that many textbooks when I was younger did. He doesn't just say it's all about slavery. Dean looks at the Civil War in the true light of day and realizes it for what it is, an ugly, bleak, gray blob where both sides thought they were doing the right thing, where both sides had good things they were doing and bad things they were doing, where both sides fought the hardest they could to secure a win. And I still hold to my belief that neither side truly won. The Union may have met its objectives, but when we look at the cost in human lives, it wasn't worth it. It's heady stuff, man. I hope you all have a wonderful week. I hope that your studies have shown you interesting things that you haven't thought of before, and I hope that we get to continue enjoying this course together. God bless. Have a great week.